Hello, welcome to the Ascent of Mount Carmel YouTube channel. If you've just stumbled on this channel and you're watching one of these videos for the very first time, it might make sense for you to go back and watch the videos in numerical order. Today we're discussing the 12th chapter of the first book of Ascent of Mount Carmel by St. John of the Cross. This chapter explains what the desires are that cause evil to our souls. We've used terms injury, evils, and damage interchangeably, so for the sake of simplicity, we're going to refer to them as evils in this installment. In earlier chapters, we discussed how voluntary desires cause evils to our souls. St. John calls the first evil a privative evil, because it turns us away from God and deprives our souls of the Spirit of God. This condition only comes from voluntary desires involving mortal or deadly sins. This condition is privative because it deprives our soul of grace in this life, and if unrepented and unatoned, it deprives us of glory in the next life. St. John calls the rest of the evils positive evils. They're not termed positive because there's anything good about them, but they're called positive because they cause us to move towards something, and in this case it causes us to move toward the creatures. As you recall from earlier installments, the positive evils are voluntary desires cause weariness to our souls, they torment our souls, they blind our souls, they defile our souls, and they weaken our souls. In the 12th chapter, St. John addresses whether any desire is significant enough to create evil within our souls in all of these ways. He also addresses whether some desires might produce one type of evil but not others.
You may think that's funny, but it's not.
Well, if it isn't my old friend, Clutch Cargo. Clutch, what do you think of the videos we've been making here?
You're doing a good job. Just don't go too fast.
Thank you for your advice, Clutch. Say, would you and Spinner be interested in joining me for this installment of Ascent of Mount Carmel?
Well, that sounds great.
Great. Just so you know, I'm going to rely heavily upon you.
We'll try and help. Cargo with his pals Spinner and Paddlefoot in another exciting adventure.
Clutch Cargo!
Thank you for joining me today, Clutch. As you know, we're discussing the 12th chapter of the first book of Ascent of Mount Carmel.
I know that very well. I wrote about it in my first adventure logbook.
Mr. Cargo.
Hey, Clutch. Mine's next.
Me too, Mr. Cargo.
Oh, I'd forgotten about that, Clutch boy. With your help, I'm hopeful that we'll make this the best installment yet.
It's such a great feat.
As you know, Clutch, St. John says that all desires ranging from serious mortal sins to mere imperfections cause some evil to our souls.
Did you hear that, Clutch? It's a great big thing.
If a voluntary desire is not a matter of a mortal sin, it's still sufficient to produce all the positive evils in the soul, though to a lesser extent. Desires involving venial sin or imperfections, however, don't produce all these evils in a complete and total extent, since they don't deprive the soul of grace. It's the loss of grace that causes all the conditions. As St. John said, the death of the soul is their life. Desires that most deprive us of grace produce the most abundant torment, blindness, and defilement.
Well, of course.
Although every voluntary desire produces all the positive evils, there are some that primarily cause one evil, while it causes other evils to a lesser extent. The evils caused to a lesser extent are a consequence of the primary evil. For example, desires of the flesh principally cause defilement of the soul and body, but it also causes the other positive evils as a consequence of the defilement.
Oh, I understand.
St. John provides some additional examples. Although one avaricious desire produced all the evils, its principal and direct result is to produce torment. Although one prideful desire produces all the evils, its principal and direct result is to produce blindness. Finally, although gluttony produces all the evils, its principal result is to produce lukewarmness and virtue.
Remarkable.
All of the vices grow through the practice of any one of them. St. John reminds us that though desires and the injuries to the soul that are caused by them just beget more desires and injuries, an act of virtue produces and creates in the soul sweetness, peace, consolation, light, cleanness, and fortitude.
It's fabulous.
All the virtues grow through the practice of any one of them. St. John tells us further that when we practice a virtue, it leaves a remnant in our soul, and that helps us to fight temptations and desires.
This will be a great help.
Unfortunately, the same is true when we sin. It compounds itself.
We've got to watch every move we make.
To clarify, this discussion has not been about the natural involuntary desires, such as the desire for warmth when we are cold. It's the voluntary desires that work all the evils that we've been discussing. We earlier discussed the Desert Fathers. When their students came to them, the first thing that the Fathers did was instruct their students to mortify all their desires for worldly things. They instructed their students to remain in their cells, which were caves in the desert, without the objects of their desires. These things would sound very extreme and severe to most of the general culture.
Sounds weird, all right.
Yes, but by placing themselves in isolation, the students in the desert were free from great misery. Now, Clutch, we've talked about some of the advantages contemplative religious have over lay people, and here again, contemplative religious have an advantage on us because they can more easily gain the isolation and withdrawal from their desires. However, it's a lot more difficult for a lay person to mortify their desires when those desires are all around us and it's hard to get away from them. But the important thing is, we are given far greater graces when we succeed at mortifying our desires.
It's not going to be easy.
Golly!
That's the idea, Spinner.
Well, that's all we have for today. I'd like to thank the viewers and subscribers for their time.
Thank you for your interest.
I hope that the viewers are reading the book Ascent of Mount Carmel and are trying to make it a part of their lives.
What do we got to lose?
Clutch, I'd like to thank you and Spinner for joining me today.
We were glad to help.
Clutch, I have to say that you're probably the best guest host I've ever had. Clutch, you're so humble. That's one of the things I really like about you. Do you think that you and Spinner could join us for a future installment?
We'll be back.
And so ends the story with Clutch Cargo and his pal Spinner and Paddlefoot. Be sure to tune in for the next exciting adventure with Clutch Cargo.